High Barnet is a station at the northern end of the Northern Line. As a matter of fact, the branch line to High Barnet is the oldest part of the Northern Line. Let's take a look, shall we? The High Barnet branch these days runs from Camden Town to High Barnet, but when it was first built it was a very different kind of line. It was proposed by a company called the Edgware, Highgate and London Railway. This is a very hilly part of London. When the first railways from London were built in the 19th century, back when the towns round here were country villages, they avoided it. The London and Birmingham Railway skirted it to the west, and the Great Northern Railway to the east. The Edgware, Highgate and London was formed in 1861 to build a commuter railway to serve the communities around here. This would connect with the Great Northern Railway at Caledonian Road and the Metropolitan Railway at King's Cross. The Great Northern Railway themselves were supportive of the scheme and suggested that it would be easier from an engineering standpoint to connect with their main line at Seven Sisters Road, which is now Finsbury Park Station, and use that to get to King's Cross. They also offered to run the actual trains. Issues with finance and engineering resulted in the Great Northern taking the railway over outright in 1867. On the 22nd of August that year, the line opened from Finsbury Park to Edgware. But they wanted to get further, specifically to Barnet. The Great Northern had originally tried to get to Barnet via another route. They had a station on their main line called Barnet, which, like many stations, was not very conveniently located for Barnet itself. Their original plan in 1863 was to build a short branch line from here to the centre of Barnet. They also proposed another line which would come from Potter's Bar through High Barnet and Totteridge to Finchley, where it would connect with the Edgware, Highgate and London Railway. But neither of these proposals were accepted. Meanwhile, the EH&L had made plans of their own to build a branch from Finchley to High Barnet, albeit by a slightly more easterly route than the Great Northern's. Following a parliamentary inquiry, the EH&L line was the one authorised in 1866, but by then the amalgamation between the two companies was well underway, so the Great Northern weren't bothered. The line to High Barnet opened on the 1st of April 1872. High Barnet itself is also known as Chipping Barnet, but the name had fallen out of fashion by that time. The station is built on the site of Barnet Fair, which is Cockney rhyming slang for hare, so a Cockney might say that Marge Simpson has a High Barnet. Most of the Edgware, Highgate and London lines were not a financial success. The line to Edgware never reached expectations, and the line to Alexandra Palace was only popular when the palace was actually open, which it often wasn't. The High Barnet branch was different. Actually, despite offering a slower route into London, passengers began to favour it over the old Barnet station. Not that the Great Northern Railway particularly minded, they got paid either way. Barnet station was renamed New Barnet in 1884, to reflect the fact that it was no longer the best station for the actual town. The name New Barnet also referred to something else. London was expanding, and the arrival of the railways encouraged the towns and villages to develop into suburbs. The Great Northern Railway advertised Barnet in 1908 as Bracing Barnet, and promised pastoral and woodland scenery. But this was fast becoming an obsolete description. In 1923, the Great Northern Railway became part of the London and North Eastern Railway, and in 1933, a new station, West Finchley, was opened. Also in 1933, the first edition of Harry Beck's Underground map came out. Beck's map, which was diagrammatic rather than geographically accurate, forms the basis of the modern tube map, as well as transit maps all over the world and indeed on this channel. I mention this only because Beck was a resident of Finchley Central, which ironically would not become an underground station until 6 years after his map was published. Just a little aside there. In 1935, the New Works programme was announced. Under this, the High Barnet branch would be taken over by the London Underground and become part of the Northern Line. In order for this to happen, the Hampstead Tube would extend from the station we now call Archway, under Highgate, to East Finchley. The rest of the line would be electrified to allow underground trains to run over it, and the stations would be rebuilt in a more modern style. The first part of the works proceeded fairly rapidly. They were begun in early 1938, and by 1939 trains were running to East Finchley. The rebuilt station at East Finchley is a popular one among underground architecture aficionados for its Art Deco stylings. Not to mention this statue of an archer by Eric Aumonier, symbolising both the area's ancient connection with hunting and the speed and directness of the Underground Line. On the 1st of April 1940, electrification to High Barnet was completed, but on the 1st of January 1941, work stopped. In the light of the wartime situation, it was decided that all non-essential works should be put on hold. After the war, priorities changed. There was very little money available to the Underground, and what there was tended to go towards repairing wartime damage rather than grand new schemes. Fortunately, the High Barnet branch was already complete, functionally at least, but rebuilding the stations would have to wait. As a result, while East Finchley is very much a modern underground station, or at least modern by the standards of the 1930s, stations like High Barnet, Woodside Park and Finchley Central still retain many of their Great Northern Railway features to this day. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. This cut-price commuter railway has a distinct identity all of its own. I hope you enjoyed this unrebuilt tale from the tube. If you did, please do hit the like button and perhaps subscribe for more content like this. Thanks as ever to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the electrification to my sleepy branch line. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.